Trauma Therapist Podcast, episode 555. All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to support and inspire new trauma therapists just starting out on the trauma-informed journey. I do that with my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0, my online courses and workshops, and the Trauma Therapist newsletter. If you're a therapist of any kind and you work with individuals who've been impacted by trauma, I invite you to head on over to my website at thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. All right, let's get started. You ready to do it?
Let's do it.
All right.
Yeah.
Recording. Okay, so 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. I am very excited to have back Brad Kammer. Brad, welcome.
Thank you so much, guys. So happy to be back with you.
All right. So Brad, who joined me back on episode 365 of the podcast, is a licensed marriage and family therapist and licensed professional clinical counselor in California. He's trained under and taught with Dr. Peter Levine, the creator of Somatic Experiencing. And Brad is a certified Somatic Experiencing Practitioner for over more than 20 years. He's also a trainer and consultant for the SEP Training Program, as well as presenter on Somatic Experiencing. In addition, Brad is currently the training director and senior trainer of the NARM Training Institute, the neuroaffective relational model, which focuses on adverse childhood experiences and complex PTSD. All right, so let me tell you something here before we get going. I wanted to bring you back because, I just really enjoyed interviewing you initially, but also really feel that you kind of you're emblematic of what I hope this podcast is about. I mean, obviously you're super smart, you're empathic, you're focused on the human being of what's going on within the context of trauma. And it was very inspiring to me. So I'm like, let's bring this dude back. Appreciate it.
Oh, it touches me. Yeah, it touches me to hear. And I just enjoyed our connection and getting to know your work too. And I just continue to be a huge fan of what you're doing. And it's part of my mission too, is to do service, to bring this trauma-informed work out into the world. And so I think we're on the same path here, and I'm happy to be with you again.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Now, I wanted to bring you back and see if we could focus in on kind of get more specific, which I don't do a lot on this podcast. I really kind of save that for my masterclass video interview series, but I wanted to do that with you because I feel obviously you have a lot to share. Let me kind of put the ball in your court. How would you like to do this?
Well, I can start with the story about myself. If that would be a good place to start.
Always great. Yep.
Yeah. So I tell the story in my classes, and it's a little embarrassing, but it feels very useful to share. This is not so long ago, probably maybe 8 years ago now. I was at a training in the Bay Area, a somatic experiencing training, and it was a beautiful place in Tiburon, right on the shores of the bay. And for the breaks, I would walk down and just by myself have some quiet time where there's like these big boulders where the water would kind of crash into the coastline there.
Now, hang on, were you a student or a teacher?
I was actually a teacher.
Okay.
Yeah, I was one of the training assistants for this training.
Okay.
So I'm immersed in a 4-day deep dive into trauma and into the body. So I'm walking on these rocks in a very kind of mindful, very open state. And about 10 yards ahead of me, I see, like on the boulders ahead of me, I see all of these hermit crabs, these little tiny hermit crabs. They're all running around. And I noticed that every time I take a step, the hermit crabs dive into the water, like the one's closest to me. And then I take another step and I see the next round dive into the water. And here I am, a grown man, 2 kids, been a therapist for 20 years. And I have this really strong thought that the crabs don't like me. And it was such this moment of like how deeply embedded in us this shame, this self-hatred is. Oh. And I knew it intellectually, of course. I teach it. I've been working with clients for many years, but in that moment, I came so in touch with how, if I'm going to project my self-hatred onto these crabs,
Mm-hmm.
what am I going to do onto my kids, to my partner, to my clients, to my students, to the world? And it really helped me to, first of all, just have even greater compassion for how much pain and suffering we're all carrying inside, but also how we reenact that in the world.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for sharing that. And when you start off by saying it's embarrassing, I mean, I immediately thought to myself, I get it, and I've shared stuff on here. It's hard,
Mhm.
but I think what you're saying is really profound in the sense it's can be easy, I think, to intellectualize all this trauma work and knowledge, right? And how the neurobiology of it.
Yeah.
But what you're saying really brings the importance of being self-aware and being able to bring that into the work you're doing with other people.
Exactly.
Not always hard, not always easy.
Not easy at all. I mean, we'll get more into this, but about the relational aspects of this work is so profound and so difficult, really. I mean, we have chosen a very difficult profession. I mean, for some people, it looks like we're just sitting there, in front of someone for an hour, or in front of the screen for an hour nowadays. But the reality is that not only are we holding space for so much pain and suffering, not just with that individual, but within their culture, within the intergenerational trauma that they're carrying, but we ourselves are also part of this larger culture and part of our own intergenerational trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And so here we are just sitting, and this is difficult to quantify. It's difficult to really describe really what's happening between two people as we're sitting there in this work. And again, I think it's the magic of it. I think it's the power of it. And I think it's also just the enormity of the suffering that we're holding with our clients and with ourselves.
So you said that shame that you had walking on the boulders, and you wanted to be more aware of that. What does that mean? Okay, so how do you use that? How did you use that?
Well, I think the first part is really this, feeling, okay, well, in the past, I think how I would have used it is I would have caught it on some level, probably, because I'm a pretty insightful person, but then I would have used shame to shame myself around having shame. And then I would have shamed myself for shaming myself for having shame. And then next thing I know, I'm a ball of tension and anxiety and depression and rigid and all that stuff, because that's where that leads. That leads to us really having to contract and shut down and protect ourselves. And so I think what I've been developing in my own work, my own process, is really catching that and having a new relationship to it, and understanding the survival function of why, as a child, as a very young child, probably even before I fully was on this planet, shutting down and shaming myself was a survival function. And now it may no longer be useful. It isn't useful for the most part for anymore as an adult, but that I also like to have it in my back pocket, because there are times that actually the enormity of what I'm dealing with, it is nice to have these old survival strategies when and if I need them.
Yeah, I mean, just even hearing you talk about it in that way feels like it's being unpacked, right? And air is being allowed to access it, and the light of awareness is being shown on that. And I think people could imagine how that could be useful, just being able to relate that in some part, right? Relate that story in some part to someone sitting across from you. And also, like you said, just using that to understand the enormity of the pain that people are going through. We're all going through,
Exactly.
to different degrees.
Yeah. So a few words that, as we were talking about this, and answered your question, like, what did I do with it, or how do I relate to it? There's words that pop into my mind. Curiosity. I think I always was a pretty curious person, but in our culture, curiosity killed the cat, right? So curiosity is not something that is really fostered very well. We need to know things. We need to orient through knowledge, not through openness and curiosity and inquiry. So developing a greater sense of curiosity is one of my answers to, like, how I related to it. Another one is humility. I mean, being able to, hey, I'm a person too. I feel shame. I feel embarrassment. I make mistakes. I have vulnerability. You know, in my younger life, using strategies to try to avoid vulnerability, to avoid the feelings that felt too big for me to tolerate when I was a child, which then leads me to another one that we talk a lot in the NARM work about heartfulness. And, you know, we talk about how developmental trauma is about heartbreak, and it's about how we have to start disconnecting from our hearts. And this has been really hard work for me, because it's easy for me to go intellectually, and
Right.
it's pretty easy for me to go into my body too, which is interesting, but to go into my heart has been a very scary place.
Be more specific. What do you mean by when you say go into your heart?
Well, I think, you know, feeling the humility, feeling the vulnerability, feeling the grief, feeling the, you know, the grief that for myself, the grief for my lineage, the grief for our culture, for our world. Again, that the enormity of it is just, we can talk about it all day intellectually,
Mm-hmm.
but when we stop and really start to feel that, how do we relate to that? What do we do
Right.
with that? And I think that's part. I have no answer to this. I'm still on this path. I'm still on this journey, but I know that I have much more ability to stay connected to my heart and to my feelings towards myself and to others than I did when I was just purely trying to survive the challenges of life.
Right. Then there's the other kind of layer, which is, you know, being a male in this society,
Mm,
and being in touch with your heart and all that stuff, and being able to talk about shame and admit shame, you know, and admit you're walking on the rocks and these crabs are moving around and you have this feeling.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think for me personally, it was a little bit of an easier journey, because I never really fully related to the stereotypes that I was kind of growing up around in the 70s and 80s when I was forming as an adult, or as a child into adulthood. Like, but I know how much that still, even though I didn't identify so strongly with that, it still, of course, impacted me. Um, and I also think about another answer to your question about, like, what do I do with it and how do I relate to that experience? And I've been thinking a lot about this recently, just in our society, but for me personally too, and for our clients, is the development of the capacity to tolerate complexity. Like in the old psychoanalytic days, they would talk about splitting. Splitting was one of the primitive primary defense mechanisms they described. And part of splitting, you see this with people that have borderline personality disorder, where it's like it's either black or white, it's good or bad, you know, things are very this or that. And, you know, people talk about in our society how it's become so polarized and all of this stuff. I think we really are living in a time of incredible splitting.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that for myself when I was younger. Again, that was one of my strategies of trying to manage life, is to reduce the complexity into a much more simple way of relating. And I think I'm doing my own work, and I'm supporting clients and the students that we're working with, to really be able to tolerate more of the distress that comes in the uncertainty, in the unknowing, and in the complexity, in the
Mm-hmm.
nuance.
Mm-hmm. What do you see as your role, you know, as a therapist, working within the context of trauma or complex trauma or developmental trauma? What do you see your personal role as?
That's a great question. Yeah, because I feel like it's evolving in some ways. You know, I came into this work, I think I talked about this the last time we were together, but I did humanitarian aid work in Asia with Burmese refugees. And I just always had this kind of social activist mindset, even when I was in my teens. I just was really interested in giving back and contributing. I wasn't someone that had ambitions for, you know, making myself big banks of money or anything like that. I really wanted to be in relationship and supporting people. And so when I came in to be a therapist, I think I was really focused on the individual, and I still am. I really believe that change, like social change, happens from the bottom up. I don't think you can legislate people to care about each other. I just don't think it happens like that. I think it has to happen from individuals shifting in their relationships to their partners, to their kids, to their communities, and that's how change happens. So I've really been interested in supporting kind of that post-traumatic growth process in individuals. But recently, as I've moved more into leadership in the NARM Training Institute, I'm really interested in building a community. I think it's similar to the work you're doing in some ways, a community where, like in the old days when psychoanalysis was first kind of coming up, they had all these institutes, and the institutes did a number of things, like the New York Institute of Psychoanalysis in the 40s and 50s. And one of the things it did is it would do, like, trainings and presentations and stuff, but it also had a community aspect where people came together to support each other, to be in community, because in this work, you're on an island when you're working individually with people, really complex clients with a lot of trauma, and having that community feels so important for me. And, in the United States, with our cultural challenges and the religious, people are not as kind of built into religion anymore. People are often very disconnected from their family of origins. A lot of people don't have, great connections to their own families. I've been very kind of involved in creating a professional community that's a home for us that work with complex trauma, where we can do the training, we can learn, and we can also support each other and mentor each other in ways that I think has been lost, just in at least in the United States.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. The the level of work that you're doing and have done on yourself, the amount of self-awareness, was that there from the get-go? You talked about when you were younger, you didn't really fall into the natural stereotypes of what it means to be a male or whatever, but was that always there, that perception, in a sense, that insight?
Yeah, well, I'm not saying it was accurate insight, but I always I remember, looking up at the stars with my friends, and, they were talking about other things, and I would start talking about the cosmos and stuff, and, why do we exist? I was just really, they called me a deep thinker. That was what people would call me. And sometimes people would call me dark even, or this was before the emo days. I'm sure I would have probably been called emo. But I wasn't really dark. I really love life experience. And so I don't really care if it's considered dark or light. The full experience is what I'm really interested in, which then it did help me gravitate to depth-oriented models. I got interested in, first I was interested more in spirituality, I guess. And then I got interested in more like Jungian, but I was interested from the very beginning in somatic-oriented approaches, which I believe is also depth. It's just a different kind of depth. So it did come pretty naturally to me, which I think has helped me a lot in my work, because I'm really not afraid of going places internally. I have fears around going places externally much more than I do internally. But yeah.
Interesting. All right, let's kind of shift gears a little. Everything we've been talking about thus far is really, really interesting to me. Can we shine that light onto an experience you had working with someone else?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think maybe the bridge that we'll get there is, there's one other piece that I was thinking about with this depth psychology and the depth orientation, is that I think that we're living, part of that splitting is the fragmentation in ourselves and in our society. And it really is just a form of objectification. We are objectifying ourselves, and then often we're seeing the world and treating the world and others in the world through objectification. And so I think a lot about the work of NARM being a model for intersubjectivity. It's like, how do we turn object into subject? Both supporting our clients to more feel their humanity, their heart inside of themselves, and also us as the helping professional working with them. So I think that's a nice bridge then to kind of talking about, maybe a few specific examples, because what is so gratifying and such an honor is to watch people sometimes they use different language, but like, I know when I experienced it, it was like a certain kind of growing up that happened, a certain kind of like three-dimensional, where I really started to feel more of my humanity, feel more of my vitality, my aliveness, and the patterns of being more stuck in what we call a NARM child consciousness, more of these kind of adaptive survival strategies start to shift, and we start to feel more of our authentic aliveness. And so I think of so many different clients that I've experienced, but there was one comes to mind because as I was preparing to meet you this morning, I saw there's a woman who I worked with who was a student in one of our trainings, and she right now, presently in the moment, is in another country having an amazing adventure. And I saw some pictures of her trip on Facebook, and I was thinking about this session that I did with her. This was probably about 2 years ago now. So 3 years before, so 5 years ago now, she was in a horrific accident, motor vehicle accident, where someone killed themselves by stepping out in front of a 4-lane highway. And she, unfortunately, tragically happened to be the person that hit this person. And luckily she was a therapist. And so she had a lot of support. She had done all kinds of different therapies over the last few years to help her. And she was able to sleep at night again. She was able to really make some somatic kind of, what we might call self-regulation. She was able to calm her nervous system enough that she could kind of be back in her life. But she never found the will to live. She hadn't found that yet. She hadn't found her capacity to come back into life. And one of the challenges of working with these shock trauma, like this was a horrible shock trauma for her, is that it also comes in this larger context of relational trauma, both in the moment in these experiences, but also what it trips up from our past. And so we did this just incredible, beautiful, moving session where for the first time in 3 years or since this accident, she found the will to live again. She found her own humanity, where she was able to shift her perception on this experience that helped her to really come back into herself and really start to feel herself as this subject, as a person that has the aliveness. And as she felt this increasing sense of aliveness, she also had an increasing capacity to tolerate the grief and the rage.
Wow.
That hadn't
So I was
been.
just going to say, it sounds like she, from what you were saying, she was able to go through the machinations of living, but she didn't have like a purpose, or you have the will to live, is what I think you said.
Yeah. This is interesting territory, because it's taking us into territory that's always a little careful. I feel a little careful to talk about, because we don't want to appropriate language from other traditions or cultures, but it really feels like a soul retrieval. It really feels like, and is that fragmentation and that splitting that happens to us not just about the way we disconnect from our hearts, but the way that our soul, whatever that means for us, I don't even know what that means exactly, but is there a way that in this deep trauma healing work, I know Peter Levine talked about this for many years, that in this coming back into our bodies and being able to resolve some of these patterns that kept us dysregulated, disorganized, disassociated, what does that mean? What's the language to use when someone comes back fully into their aliveness?
So as her therapist, what was going on for you such that you were able to be there as a guide, in a sense, through this process? It sounds like there's a big shift that happened.
Yeah. Well, I think,
were you cognizant of it? Were you like, I got to bring it, it's got to be page 22 of Peter's book. That's going to work.
Yeah. No. I mean, I think, the work I was doing with her was the neuroaffective relation model, the NARM work. And it really starts with an invitation for what her intention, or what a client's intention is, what their deep desire is. And on paper, it sounds so easy, like, oh, what would you like for yourself today? But that question itself is already inviting something very deep inside someone. there's different language people use for it, aspirations, desires, intention. But it's inviting something that often is a state that we've disconnected from. And that we're trying with all these old strategies. Me looking at those crabs, using shame is actually a strategy of me trying to get back into connection. And it becomes a symptom, it becomes an obstacle, and really inviting what's the deep intention that our clients have for themselves. So that's where it really starts. It's about inviting a certain kind of agency. And from that process, then starting to really just drop into curiosity that how is our client organizing their experience in relationship to what they're sharing? Not the story. She's told that story many, many times. And in fact, sometimes when these patterns shift internally, the stories change, because the story itself sometimes actually keeps the trauma stuck. And so it's really interesting when we're just inviting this deep, radical curiosity and invitation to explore both inside of her, but also me, because I'm there part of the process with her too. I mean, that's what I'm doing internally. I'm doing active self-inquiry internally. Then we're starting to really feel into the obstacles that are in the client's way of what they most want for themselves. And as we start to feel those obstacles, we can start to shine the light on how clients are relating to those obstacles, how they're relating, the way that we shame ourselves and sabotage ourselves. I mean, we sabotage the things we most want in our lives all the time. And then that becomes about really supporting someone to start to have a new relationship to their internal experience, which then, like I mentioned, often shifts how they view and relate to the external situations as well.
Right. Powerful. Wow. I love that. The deep, radical curiosity. All right. So with the interest of time here, you have a podcast, of course you do, Transforming Trauma.
Yes.
Awesome. Tell us about that.
Well, first of all, inspired by you, by the way.
Appreciate that.
Yeah. And it really started off as we have so many incredible people that are coming through the NARM trainings. And I do a lot of consultations for the participants in our training. And I would sit there listening to the work they're doing. And I just was so inspired, similar to when I listened to your podcast. And I said, we gotta get this out there. Like, people need to know of the incredible work and very difficult work that we're doing. And I'm also I'm a huge fan in psychoeducation. I believe that it's part of helping all of us to relate to life experience differently. And I don't want to keep this behind closed doors like psychology or, science often has in the past. And so I really wanted to kind of bring this understanding of how we're working with developmental and complex trauma out into the world. So it started by kind of wanting to, show off some of our community. And then we started wanting to have larger conversations with other people. You were on our podcast, and we've had Dick Schwartz several times, the creator of Internal Family Systems, Dr. Gabor Mate, Dr. Christina Bethel. I mean, we've had some really great folks that are doing incredible work, and we're going to continue throughout as we go forward. So we're kind of going back and forth between showcasing some of the amazing people in our community, the NARM community, as well as people that we just want to connect more with and support each other as we're doing this work.
Yeah. Awesome. And people can access that on Apple, iTunes, and everything, and anywhere.
Exactly. Yeah. Transforming Trauma. Yes.
Okay. Awesome. And we'll have a link for that up here at the show notes page at thetraumatherapistpodcast.com. Once again, I'm speaking with Brad Kammer. All right. In addition to that, any other trainings you want to bring people aware of through NARM? Okay.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah. So we have the first level 1 training is for all helping professionals that work with complex trauma. So we have people that are educators, doctors and nurses, alternative health practitioners, mental health professionals. We have in our training right now, we have a volleyball coach that is also a teacher who works with high school girls that have very high ACEs score. scores. And so she wanted to get some trauma-informed understanding about how to support these adolescent girls in coming into adulthood. And so we have, again, just such interesting people that work in prison, corrections, and all sorts of things. So that's our level 1 training. That's an online training. We call it the Online Basics Training. That happens twice a year. The next one will be coming up in September, so I'm not sure when this will be aired.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll make sure it gets out before then. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, and then the 2 training is for mental health professionals. So these are for licensed therapists or for people that are in their internship or traineeship or graduate program even, that are working towards licensure or are licensed as social workers or psychotherapists, psychologists. And it's a year-long training. And we go into a deep dive into working with developmental, relational, cultural, intergenerational trauma, just the whole field of complex PTSD.
Okay. And people can access those trainings where?
Yeah, NARMtraining.com.
Okay. But before we go, so what attracted you to NARM such that you're one of the main dudes?
Yeah. I was... luckily, before I even became a therapist, I was turned on to Wilhelm Reich's work. So I was interested in somatic psychology. And when I got into graduate school, I specialized in somatic psychology. I had the great fortune of learning about Peter Levine's work, coming into somatic experiencing. And I met Dr. Lawrence Heller, who's the creator of NARM. He was one of the somatic experiencing teachers. He was my somatic experiencing teacher, and he became a mentor of mine. And he always was interested in working with relational and attachment trauma. And when I first met him in 2000, he said he was working on this book. It took him about 10 or 12 years to finally publish the book, but it came out, I think in 2012, called Healing Developmental Trauma. And when that book came out, he decided to create his own model for working specifically with developmental trauma. Somatic experiencing works with all sorts of forms of trauma, including developmental trauma, but this was a specific training just to work with the complexity of developmental trauma. And so I started, reconnecting with him for his new trainings that he was creating, and then soon became a teacher. And I just have always been drawn to the relational aspect. I think because it's my legacy of trauma, my intergenerational and cultural wounding, and how that played out in my attachment and my family system. And it just always felt very aligned for me. And I never found a model that worked with attachment that felt like somatically aligned. I liked a lot of the different models out there, and there's some great ones, but I really was looking for something deeply embodied. And because Larry has been a somatic oriented therapist for nearly 50 years, he integrated somatic experiencing and other somatic oriented models into the model that he ended up creating.
Awesome. All right, Brad, as we kind of wind down here, what's the best way for people to contact you?
You can go to I have my own personal website, which is body-mind psychotherapy.com. And that people can also write me at Brad Kammer at body. Oh God, now I'm spacing my email. body-mindtherapy.com.
Okay.
And also through the NARM Training Institute, people can also connect to me through there. It's Brad Kammer at narmtraining.com if they're interested specifically in NARM.
Okay, awesome. And I have a feeling after people listen to this, again, they will be. Awesome, man. Love having you on here. Love talking to you. And you're just you're so inspiring, man. It's awesome.
Yeah, well, you too. And I look forward to having you back on our podcast and one of these days getting together in person and just hanging out a little bit more. So thanks again for all that you're doing. I really
appreciate it. All right, man. Take care.
Okay.